Welcome to this episode of Shapes of Grief. I'm Liz Gleeson, and today I'm joined by Sacha and Langton-Gilks from Dorset in the UK. Sacha, you're very welcome. Sacha, thank you so much for joining me today. The reason I reached out to you is because somebody had been in contact with me. Their child had just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. What do I do? And I knew to find other people who'd walked that pathway would be super important, because you've lived it, you've breathed it, you've survived it, you've foraged a life despite losing your beloved Dee Dee. So you have a wealth of wisdom, I'm sure, to impart for anybody who finds themselves in the situation that you were in over a decade ago, and that other people are in every single day. Every single day someone's child gets a cancer diagnosis. So if we could go back to life 12 years ago, before Dee Dee got sick, what was going on for your family?
Oh, so he died during London 2012, so that's 10 years ago, but his pathway had been nearly 5 years. So he was diagnosed at 2007 with, it was not stage 4, it was a grade 4, so it was the most aggressive kind of cancer you can have, whichever cancer you're talking about, but it hadn't spread. So at this point we're given a 75% chance of survival to 5 years, and slightly less of getting to 10, at which point they actually use the word cure, which I found stunning, because I saw the size. I mean, it was the size of a Satsuma in his head, and I just thought, how on earth does anyone survive that? But then, of course, you've got so that was 2007, October, and he was 11 years old at that point. And basically what he had to do, because you know what it's like with these cancers, it's the horror that the treatment is so toxic. You know, I know parents whose child has died from the actual treatment. I mean, that's very, very rare, I have to say. But, you know, you can't believe they're doing something so horrific to your child in order to make them better. It just messes with your head in every way you can think of. So basically, his protocol was called the Packer Protocol. And I always thought it sounded like some sort of ghastly thriller that I never, ever wanted to read. And he had to do 6 weeks of intensive radiotherapy to his whole brain and spine with weekly chemotherapy. And then after that, 56 weeks of intensive combined chemotherapy. At which point my husband had sort of asked the nurses, when it sort of right at the beginning, what they reckon the sort of ballpark was. And I thought he said 15 weeks. He went, no, darling, 50. At which point I thought they'd all basically lost their minds. How could you do that to a child? Do you know what I mean? And because the thing is that children have to do if adults and children have the same cancer, the reason that more children survive than adults proportionally is because they can take more treatment. But isn't that a horrific concept? So he finished it. He did all of it, relapses in 2010, at which point for that cancer, if you relapse, they're nearly all dead within 18 months. But he was given, we decided on the basis of his quality of life that doing the old treatment meant he could do the things he loved, which is super important when you're in that situation. I was like, surely we should do the new one. That'll be all sparkly and fantastic, and then it'll cure him. And my husband very sensibly said, well, why don't we try the old one and see how we go? Because the new one had such bad side effects. He wasn't going to be able to go and see his mates at school and do all the things that he loved doing. He was passionate about the environment and wanted to go to uni and have a girlfriend. And so everything we did the decisions were tailored to what was important to him. So, and that old chemotherapy, which actually turned out to be from a Northern American Indian plant that they've used for thousands of years, which, as someone who comes from a slightly sort of herbal, somehow I thought, why don't they just call it the, American mayapple? I'd find it a lot easier to take that you're giving my child that than etoposide, which just sounds like weed killer. So, and he had an extraordinary remission. I mean, as in, our oncologist had never seen it in his life. At that point, they consult around the world, and the best person in America, the best person in Europe, the best person in the country for that cancer says to Southampton, who were amazing, do a stem cell transplant. which he did in spring 2011. And then unfortunately, it didn't work. So even though he kind of gets out of hospital, you don't know it's worked until they're alive for 5 years. So again, it's just such a mess. You don't know immediately that it's worked. If they're alive in 5 years, it worked, and he wasn't. So, you know, but of course now that cancers lots of different sorts and all this kind of thing.
I
but
just can't even imagine the psychic chaos of this. And just to slow down for a few moments, Sacha, the moment you get this diagnosis, everything changes. Like, I imagine just everything changes. Your entire thought process changes, your body in the world, how you relate to everybody, what matters. Would you talk a little bit, Sacha, about getting the news, you know, getting that diagnosis for Dee Dee?
As you say, you're right on all those counts. But you're in such a shock that you're not aware of all those things. I'm sure people around me could see it, but you're in fight or flight. You're just firefighting. And I, at that point, had a nearly 5-year-old, and Rufus would have been 9. So as you say, you're trying to do normal life and what's for tea and how many washes do we need? And does the car need servicing? The usual stuff. And my husband and I are self-employed on top of that. But of course, you don't care about any of that. I mean, you can imagine, you're just talking pure shock. And of course, I think the first diagnosis, the first time you see the size of the tumor, and then it's not one, you get bits. So with brain tumors particularly, there's a growth and you don't know if it's going to be cancerous or not, and then whether they can even do surgery, let alone whether they can treat it. So it's sort of multiple meetings of sort of catastrophe going on in your head. And I'm not going to pretend, I think it took 6 months for my husband and I to process what we were talking about. And some parents don't even get 6 months from start to finish. I mean, I can certainly make a case that we were lucky that we had time, but every pathway is different. But I mean, as you say, you're not functioning and you've got so much adrenaline and cortisol pouring through your body on top of your normal PMT and all the rest of it. And I can just remember looking at this oncologist as he started to talk about all this treatment that Dee Dee was going to have, thinking they're all crazy. And I could hear the airplane, because Southampton General, they have the airport just up the road, hearing the planes that go out to the Channel Islands where I used to go as a child, thinking, if we just run away and just jump into the car and just run, and no one's going to find us. And if I just keep everybody in the house and I'll never let anyone out and it's all going to be fine. Yeah.
And it's so true. It's like, I think it's times like this where we really see the animal nature of who we are. It's so down to what's happening in our bodies. It's like our minds cannot process. It's surreal. Something else has come in and we just don't want it. But like you say, there's this process in the body of a flooding of adrenaline and cortisol. Our brains don't work. So even if people are telling us things, we're not taking it in because it's too much to take in. And, you know, I often say to people, don't even try to process this for now, just mind your body. What can you do to help your body to feel safe again? You know, it's very much a body-based need that people have. We throw leaflets at them and information, and it's almost impenetrable, this catastrophe, this shock that you described there, Sacha.
I think that's very true. And if I'd had you to say that to me, I would have realized, I know it's really stupid, but like after he died, a hot water bottle on my chest and a really soft scarf around my neck, keeping warm, water, you know, a lovely hot bath, those kind of, because you instantly contact with physical things, don't you?
Yeah.
It's that sort of warm water over your hands. It's, as you say, it's very primal. And I certainly remember we had, unfortunately, because he was late diagnosed, because the early diagnosis campaign, HeadSmart, didn't exist when he was, I think. So he ended up having 10 extra brain operations on top of what I told you before. So the constant crisis, you know, you end up just in constant fight or flight for 5 years. And I've become very great friends with another mother from hospital. And we talk about having an amygdala in our brain that is just like a piece of fried bacon. It just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
I can't process stress anymore properly. And I have to warn people I'm working with, please don't think I'm, I know I'm going to appear to be really stressy sometimes, but I'm doing my best. But I catastrophize because I had to fight and flight for so long that I have to go through this ridiculous process, even though he died 10 years ago, of saying, Sacha, he's dead now. You know, your daughter is not going to die cycling to the post office. The police aren't about to arrive, but my brain does this.
You're hyper vigilant all the time.
Hyper vigilant. And I know that that's what I do. And I guess I probably always will to a certain extent, because that's just part of the damage that we've been left with. And I do my best to acknowledge it and manage it. I sing, I'm a gardener. I mean, I'm lucky in that sense, you know.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. It's a body thing. I think that's not said ever, really.
You try to accommodate it, but it's still there. I think, you know, when we're talking about anticipatory grief, and I would support people, you know, whose loved one has got a diagnosis, or maybe they have themselves. So there's all that anticipation, then there's the actual dying and death, and then there's the grieving process, the bereavement afterwards. But I think, you know, we've certain patterns. Everybody responds so uniquely, but there are patterns, you know, there are certain sort of predictable factors about all of this that we have in common, you know, in our own unique way. And certainly when someone first dies, we say that we experience acute grief. And it's like what we're describing in the body there, where the grief, the volume is really loud. We are like a skinned animal. We're so vulnerable. You know, and, you know, it's our nervous system is just so activated. And generally over time, with the right supports, we learn to integrate our grief. It doesn't go away. It's always there. Sometimes the volume will come up, but generally we can carry it. You know, we're able to manage it. We can carry it. It's there. So it's like that, the volume up, the volume starts to ease and go down, and then we'll come up at certain other times. But I think when we're living with the possibility that someone we love is going to die, or the probability, or even the definite, that's the definite outcome in the short term, the volume never goes down. It's like we're in that acute grief stage for a long time. And that acute grief stage is so physical. It's difficult to sleep. It's difficult to digest. It's difficult to make sense of anything, to read anything. It's difficult to go to Tesco. It's difficult to talk, you know, but these, it's so true. What was that like for you, that anticipation stage where maybe he'll be cured, maybe he won't, but everything has changed, yet no one has died. I'm watching my kid go through this horrific treatment, like you said. I don't know what the outcome will be. There's no situation more difficult.
And as you say, it's managing the unknown is definitely the hardest thing. Even when we'd got the second relapse and we knew now he is definitely going to die in short order, because at the very beginning they'd said from the beginning of symptoms to death is 6 weeks, because it's a grade 4. It's super fast, like a sort of Formula One car as opposed to a mobility scooter. So I knew we had very little time, but doing planning, at least you know the worst bits, as you say, when you're, I describe it as being like the princess and the pea, that old fairy story, do you remember? And I could feel, I couldn't articulate why I was particularly worried about him. And I'd be thinking, oh, I'll just put another mattress on the pea and another one until I'm like up under the ceiling, because you've got nothing to go on, but you just know something is going on. And until some symptom pops up that I can articulate to his medical team, I'm just left knowing it's not okay, you know, and trying to live with that, which you've just squished down while you're trying to work and do everything else, is, yeah, really, really bad for you.
It reminds me of that Auden poem, Is It Stop the Clocks? And it's like that. It's like, how is the world still turning and people are going about their business and posting their puppies on Facebook when this thing is happening in my life? How is it that everything is still going on as normal? And it's such a dissonance, you know, It's
Yeah,
really
and that's also completely true. And the other thing I must say is, you know that it's called anticipatory grief, but what I keep saying to healthcare professionals, I talk regularly to palliative care services of all different stripes, types and levels, and I said, nobody said you're grieving now. The minute you know your child is going to have a life-shortening disease, you start grieving, whether they're fairly sure you're going to get decades or, you know, days, months, weeks, you know, years, whatever. And nobody said it's a thing. And that I could have then said, because all these amazing hospices have bereavement teams that can tell you this is what you're doing. You're not going crazy. You're not coping badly compared to everybody else, you know, because you haven't got anyone else you can ask. Unlike with when you've got a child, normally you can ask your girlfriends or, you know, the husbands, whatever. Did this happen to you? And because, well, children's cancer, most of the children's diseases are very rare. There won't be anyone locally you can ask. So it's only national. And yet, as you say, you're unable to kind of, you're dealing with so much. The thought of trying to reach out is too difficult. But no one said to me, there's a thing called anticipatory grief. You're not going crazy. And you're trying to cope with the fact that the life that you thought your beautiful child was going to have is not going to happen. But the thing is also to keep the hope going, in the sense that that doesn't mean they're not dying tomorrow. They're not dying now, usually, thank God. So you've just got to reframe your hope in terms of, you know, Dee Dee's never got to his 18th, 21st, married, child, all those normal, but he did live, and he really lived in his last months. So I guess you have to reframe that hope. And that obviously is very difficult, because your brain is like, how can you have hope when your child's going to die? Are you mad? And the answer is you can, but you will probably need help. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's little pockets of peace. You know, I don't think life is going to feel great for a long time, but it's to find those little pockets of peace, because there is so much lost when a diagnosis hits a family. You know, it's your assumptions about the future. It's your assumptions about your children's lives and how they're going to lead them. And not only is it that your child is not going to see adulthood, but their siblings, if there are siblings, are going to be bereaved early. Your life is going to be different. You're already a different person for your other children. So there's so much loss here, so much loss.
And as you say, I also realized when I wrote the book was asked to write the book about 3 years after he died. I don't think I could have done it before. But what I realized doing that was that I had, you know, when your child, when you know that they are definitely going to die, that there are no more curative treatments anywhere in the world at any price. And it's like, well, I can't do that. That is just impossible. That is Mount Everest. It's just not possible. And I met someone whose child had the same cancer but was younger, and she managed his end of life with two. So he had an 8-year-old daughter, then a 6-year-old little boy, and he was the one who had the same cancer as my son, and then a younger one. And I remember thinking, if she can do that in a rural setting like me, I can do it. But you need that confidence. Do you know what I mean? Because obviously you say your memories, your grief is impacted by the quality of the life and death. So it's, as you say, it's all interlinked. But I had the fear of the process of the death all slammed together with the fear of the grief. How am I going to cope, you know, when he's not here anymore? And that idea in itself is almost impossible. And on top of that, he'd said to me after his first relapse, we were driving home, you know, you're not looking at them, you're driving. So that's like going on a walk. It's a sort of, the conversations aren't so sort of, you know. And he said, you will be okay, won't you? You and Dad and his siblings. And of course I'm driving thinking, yeah, I'm going to be just terrific. You know, but obviously I can't say that as the windscreen wipers are going like this on the M, whichever. So, but on the other hand, at my worst points, I realized that for him was his hope. It was incredibly important that I somehow managed to get us all there, that my husband and I, and that we managed to be okay. Do you know what I mean? Even though that as a concept was just, how on earth do you do that?
He needed to see that you would be okay in the shadow of his death.
Yeah. That
What
was
a
his
thing
hope.
for a young child to ask their mom. We think the difficult conversations are going to be about sex, weed, and shoplifting.
Oh, I'm
You
still
know,
worried about those ones.
but the importance of it, the importance that we look this right in the face and that we're available every step of the way, both to ourselves and for everyone else.
That's exactly right, because as you say, it is the biggest consolation in my grief that he was having a really good quality of life right up until the point where really his organs were shutting down, which was so that's my dog. Of the 3 months, he was only in bed and sort of sedated 4 days. And so I think people think that if you're being honest about the fact that someone's going to die and you do an advanced care plan and all this kind of stuff, that you're talking about death all the time, you're being really negative, you're giving up, you're stopping treatment. I'm quoting things I see the entire time out there. And it's like, none of those things is actually true. Do you know what I mean? You're doing tons of treatment, they're just not curative. But again, I find that people, and if you don't plan, then the one thing I wanted to avoid was stress and distress. I wanted calm and comfortable, and then that would mean dignified and peaceful. But you can't do that unless you plan, and you can't plan unless, as you say, you have to be open to it. And you're not being a negative loser coward who didn't fight hard enough in their cancer battle. Oh my God, that language just does my head in.
Yeah, there is no battle to be fought here. It's like meeting it with compassion, being realistic, but also holding hope,
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you about this, Sacha. I just think there's impossible choices that have to be made by parents, particularly with treatment. You talk there about one of the medications sounding like a weed killer and being so harsh on their bodies. Yet, if there's any hope of cure, of course, people are going to grab this, and it can create such dissonance again to know that this treatment is making our children suffer so much, but hopefully on the other side, there might be some good news, or they need this treatment so that the pain is managed, or whatever, the pain of the illness. What do you think about those choices? And it's almost like we don't have a choice if we're told that there's hope, because of course we have to just throw everything at it. But if we're told that it's incurable, and which is also different to terminal.
Absolutely, that is critical.
And so I'm still trying to formulate my question here, but I'd really like to unpack this a bit for anyone listening. And I'm so conscious as well that here you and I are having a discussion about something that happened 10 years ago, emotionally removed from it. And there's somebody at home possibly crying their eyes out because this is brand new to them. And I just really want to acknowledge that although we're talking from our brains here, my heart is very much turned on here, and I can feel the heartache that people listening are going through. I just wanted to acknowledge that. But it feels important to just, if we can slow this down a little and just really talk about, where there's choice. Is there no choice sometimes with treatment? People who choose not to go down the treatment route because their child is at end of life, they've had terminal illness and they're at end of life, and they're choosing to spend quality time rather than longer time. There's so much here if we can break it down. And then incurable versus terminal. Can we start with the treatment, Sacha? What are your thoughts there about the different treatment pathways and what people might face?
Things are changing all the time, and because they're now sort of genetically testing the tumors, they can personalize the treatments more. And I think the thing that I realized is that it depends totally on the person, on the child or the adult, what they love to do. So if you're going to choose to do a treatment, so like if we had picked doing the new treatment, that one of the side effects was so bad that he wouldn't have been able to go to school. And for school for him was the thing that was his life. So therefore we chose not to do that new sparkly treatment. And then it just happened that the old one worked brilliantly. So you're always making decisions based on what's important to the person you love. And I think if you can, but it's so difficult with the noise out there being, you've got to try everything. And they frame hope only as survival and cure. When for a lot of people, as you say, if you're diagnosed in stage 4 and they're saying it's already incurable, then all the treatments you're talking about are going to manage all the comforts and manage the symptoms. And there are lots and lots and lots of treatments for all the different aspects. So we were managing seizures, vomiting, pain, because you've got spinal tumors, and they were all managed perfectly at home. It can be done. But you have to acknowledge that's where you're at. So if you're going, if you have been persuaded that being positive is being in denial, my child's not going to die, my child's not going to die, my child's not going to die, you're not going to be able to have the conversations that will manage this well.
Yeah,
because you're hoping for something that's unrealistic. Yeah. I mean, there might be a 0.0001% that your beloved child is the outlier in the statistics, but we all know we hate statistics. They're only okay when you're on the right side of them. And, you know, we weren't. We were the 25% our child died rather than the 75% who were cured. Do you know what I mean? So at each stage, and you can, of course, only make the decision with the information you have on the day, and you mustn't feel guilty. You love your child beyond. You are doing your best. It's not your fault or your child's fault. It's got nothing to do with anyone fought hard enough to the end and they were so brave. My son would have been really like, what are you talking about being brave? I don't think I was brave. We don't think our family are victims. Do you know what I mean? It's not your fault. It's the disease that's put your child into this situation. And there's not nearly enough treatments and cures out there for the cancers that tend to be killing children, which is basically mostly brain tumors, but also some of the bone cancers and the blood cancers. Oh, anyway, but you can see what I'm saying, can't you? That it's like it sounds contradictory to acknowledge that they're going to die and still have hope, but that is the human condition. You can do both of those things, and I thought Deborah James did it wonderfully. She was totally acknowledging she was going to die, but her husband called, you know, her rebellious hope. I'm going to go to Ascot again. We're going to have sushi next week. My son was like, can we have hummus for tea? Can we have Granny over tomorrow? Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's, as you say, pockets of magic and peace, as you said. Yeah. So making the decisions, trying to hold at bay that, as you say, very rightly, dissonance. I mean, our post office was threatened because they didn't offer us a miracle cure. And if you come to us this week, we'll give it to you half price, because my son was in the press when he was dying to raise awareness of the symptoms so that people didn't go through what he did. And the press found out where we lived. And they're doing this whole, cure. And you only have to pay £25,000. And it's unbelievable that people are that wicked to put you in that situation when your child's team has said, you know, we tried the experimental treatment from America that was delivered by the NHS. Do you know what I mean? There was nothing left in terms of cure. But I think you and I unpicking this terminal end of life is technically your last year. But of course, you can't really call that until afterwards, can you? So, and rather like with a birth, they can't actually say it unless you're having a cesarean, exactly when that baby's going to turn up. And death's a bit the same. Yeah. And I think I always thought the doctors would be able to recognize when a child was dying. And the answer is it's not that easy. It really isn't. And then you can kind of get into that, well, if they can't recognize that a child's dying, what else don't they know? And then you start to not trust them. But the answer is prognosis is always uncertain in terms of detail. But as you say, that there are general patterns that they can recognize.
Yeah.
But I think I thought that it would be much more obvious. Do you know what I mean?
So an incurable disease is a disease we could live with for years.
And the cancers, that's happening more and more and more. So
Yeah.
I see people online saying, I've had terminal breast cancer for 10 years. Well, that's not terminal, that's incurable, that's being managed. You're terminal in your last year. And the thing is, I think, because I didn't know any of this when it was happening to us, I now sort of say to parents, you know, check, do you mean incurable? Or are you genuinely saying that you think we've probably only got, you know, a year and less left? Again, and I also say to them, though, if you don't know as a doctor, please say that, because that's better than sympathetic silence. That is truly terrifying, really. Because as you say, we're back to the unknowns again, and I'm not a healthcare professional, so my head just goes, pow, and starts making up even worse scenarios than what's actually happening, if that's possible.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether I've answered your question very well, but it's...
Yeah, I think, you know, just to break it down, because everything just gets jumbled together, I think, when we're in that shock. And it's, you know, there's the different pathways are, you know, I suppose some doctors will go for a cure. They'll believe that it is curable. And that's one pathway, or that there's a hope for a cure. And that's one pathway. It can be very, very difficult. And sometimes it works. And then there's also treatment to manage a condition, but you know that it is incurable, and we know that. But they could live for a long time still. And then there's a heavily evolved cancer, which is terminal, and that could be soon. We're looking at weeks or months, or maybe a couple of years. And it's important, I think, doctors really need to be able to communicate this.
Yeah.
And often they don't know themselves, or they think they're sparing people by not being explicit. But one of my guests, Nora Casey is her name, and we talk about the last couple of days of her husband's life. And that Nora's a nurse. She knows that her husband has cancer. She knows that he has terminal cancer. She knows that he's in the hospice. But she knows that with her head. Knowing it with her body is a whole other thing. It's like, I know this information, but I have not processed it or fully accepted it. I don't mean we're okay with it, but I accept that this is a fact, hasn't quite happened. So it's not about being smart or listening or not listening. It is literally our psyche is impenetrable for certain things. And Nora talks about, you know, the night before her husband Richard died, the consultant coming in and saying, have you any questions? You know, pulling them aside, herself and her 12-year-old son. And her son said, is my dad going to die? And the consultant said, yes, he is. Have you any other questions? When is my dad going to die? Well, I can't say for certain, but probably in the next day or two. That was the first time that they absorbed that information. But Nora says, and she says it so much more beautifully than I do in our episode, you know, that it gave them the best gift ever, because they were able to sit there and go, this is it, I love you, thank you, you know, and have those important exchanges of words, and, you know, to put words on feelings, to read a little bit of poetry. They had that. There are so many people who don't have that. And I hear this all the time in my work. We thought we had more time. I mean, none of us should be assuming that anyway, but so many people say, I thought I had more time. I thought I had time to have those little pockets of magic where we're sitting in the reality of our situation together and exchanging our love, essentially.
I think what's even harder for parents is that we think that protecting our child means not telling them they're going to die. So I hear nurses, so I followed our son. I was luckier that he was older and he was very clear. So I probably would have done that more had our son not been totally open about it. So it's like, I was trying to keep up with him. Do you know what I mean? He'd accepted it before my husband and I hear nurses say, what do we say? The parents have said to us, I forbid you from telling my child they're going to die. And the child, the young person, is talking to the nurse going, please, will you talk to mum and dad? I want to talk about my funeral. I want everyone bright colours, no black. I want to talk about my digital legacy. And the nurses are stuck with this. And so the psychologist I heard at this particular conference was just saying it's trying to slow it down and saying to the nurses, make them more cups of tea, try and find out what are they really frightened. We've got to break down the fears. And I know that for me, it's that thing of, you're worried you're going to let your child down. And this whole thing of giving up, that by acknowledging they're going to die, you've given up on your child, and therefore you're a horrific parent, when it's the opposite. As you say, the danger of not doing it is, if I'd done that and then found out after Dee Dee died that, because he'd written something down and I find it, and it's like, I just wanted to go and have tea on the beach with Granny, and I could have done that. The regrets you're left with, you can't say and do the things you need to do. And for children, as I say, this giving up narrative, this fighting to the end thing that's put on to the parents because they think it's their fault when it's not their fault. Mm. And the thing that's important, you said something earlier, which I must sort of pick up, is if there had been any hope of cure, we might have gone on. As I say, so at the point at which we were starting to refuse treatments. So at the end, we were described as, actually it was on the national television, which was horrific, because it's like, they've gone home. David Langton-Gilks has gone home. They've stopped treatment and he's gone home. And it's like, none of that's true. He hasn't stopped treatment. When you're having palliative treatment, you're having loads of treatment. It's just not curative. Do you see what I'm saying? Mm. Our son hadn't given up. He was being incredibly positive. And the thing is, it's, as you say, it's what our son refused. He refused to do any more chemotherapy because he'd already done the amount I told you at the beginning. And it would have meant, for him, what was critical was to be at home. And we couldn't have done it. If you're having chemo, you have to go back for blood test. Well, they can do blood tests at home, but you have to have your bloods done and then have to go back in and scans. And no, he said, no more hospital. I want to stay at home and have a party. So we refused the last non-curative. It was supposed to buy him time, but it would have been time spent in hospital. That wasn't quality time as far as my son was concerned, Dee Dee was concerned. So he also refused steroids that might have slowed it down, because he'd had to take lots during his treatment, and they made him feel so awful that he said, you swear, no more steroids. And of course his team's like, yes, sir, and it's, so there's the treatments you can refuse because they're going to impact on what your child or what you love to do. Yeah, and therefore it's not a price worth paying. Yeah. So best interest decisions for children, which again are, I get driven crazy when I hear it in the media, because the media imply that somehow the parents are not involved. Surely it's the parents' decision. And it's like, you're implying that we're not involved in this process. And again, nothing could be further from the truth. Yeah. You know your child best. You don't know the disease best and how it tends to progress. Do you know what I mean? Or if you're after an accident, how that tends to work out. And those things get muddled up. So basically what happens is your child's entire team, they really argue about what they think is the right thing to do. Which treatment? Is it worth it? What are the side effects? They argue, they come up with what they think is the best decision for your child in this particular circumstance, and they present it to you. And as parents, you have to agree. You are totally part of that decision, or you disagree, and then you have to, go to mediation. But it is quite rare.
The key there, Sacha, are those words, is it worth it? Because having treatment for a possible cure is different to having treatment to buy time. Yeah. And I think it's so essential that we look at the time we're buying. Is it prolonging life or is it prolonging death? And I've been close to both options, where, we were buying time to get Christmas, but that Christmas will be a nightmare in their minds forevermore because their child was suffering so much. Yeah, they got through Christmas, but what sort of a Christmas was it? So buying time we really have to, what sort of time are we buying? Is it going to be, how is your child going to be ill for that time? Are they going to be unhappy? Are they going to be uncomfortable? Or if our child is going to die, how do we make sure that they can die in the best possible, gentlest manner? Sheila Boland did a podcast with me, and she just, I don't know how she somehow seemed to supersede that brain shutting down, that shock, to be able to make really good decisions for her child. Everybody's decision's different. But when she knew that her child had incurable cancer, it was terminal, there was no hope, and that was made very clear, which I think was very helpful for her. They said, okay, how do we make the most out of this time, and how do we give him the very best possible death? And it's, if anyone's listening, it's an episode well worth going back to listen to. Immediately the focus on what does my child need? What's the very best possible outcome here? If the outcome is definitely terminal, how do we make this as gentle, as safe, as loving as possible, as opposed to let's try and get 6 months?
I know, and it's sort of, I don't feel guilty, but that's my head talking. My body still struggles with having made the decision with my husband to do the stem cell rescue. And of course, our son was making decisions, actually, because at this point he's 15, and actually the team spoke to him and we were just in attendance, as it were. So I'm being crazy saying the word guilty, but you can feel where I'm coming from.
But there was hope there.
There was hope there, and our son agreed. But again, you don't know until you're in it. And then you're like, oh, it was utterly horrific, given they gave the same amount of chemotherapy again in a week. He was basically dead and then brought back. It's like rebooting a hard drive. And I do remember sitting there in isolation, because you have to be in isolation for 6 weeks because they're so vulnerable to infection. I remember sitting there and thinking, it was so horrific, his suffering. I remember thinking, if someone comes in the door now and says, all your other 2 children are dead and so is your husband, I cannot feel any more. I am so distressed that, it's like when you're the blackest of black, the despair of despair, or the joyest of joy, when you can't be happier or you can't be, I'm now maxed out. That's me at my bottom, saturated, which, but he did pull through, and, I just thought, my God, I hope if I was ever in that situation, I would behave as well as he did. I mean, young people and children seem to have a wisdom about death that the grown-ups struggle to arrive at, and because he followed the teachings of Buddha. He'd tell me off if I said he was Buddhist. He said, no, I follow the teachings of Buddha. So I would sort of tease him and say it was Buddhist light. But he would say, life is suffering, but every second is a miracle. And I'd be muttering under my breath, as you can imagine. But for him, sort of learning, accepting that, and he used to use meditation as a tool to cope when things were particularly difficult. Like if operations in the early days were being at the last second cancelled because some poor child was even more sick than him, so it would be the youngest child first, quite understandably. He would just meditate on his bed because there's nothing he can do. So yeah, as you say, I don't feel guilty, but my goodness, did we do all those treatments, and which was why it was particularly difficult when it was being told to the public that, given the impression that he was somehow giving up, and that mother should make him have more treatment. They weren't explaining the differences, doing what you're talking about. And
I'm in no way judging anyone who chooses treatment, and like I say, if there's a glimmer of hope, of course, any of us, I'm sure, would grab whatever it is, whatever is there, if we thought it could have a different outcome. I think I'm more referring to when we know the outcome, that the child is going to die, then looking at the different treatments rather than denying the inevitable. Do we need to try and somehow accept the inevitable that death is the outcome, but how could we do this differently? And
sort of
impossible decisions to make.
they are. I think that's what I also understood sort of later, that I could flip from do anything, I don't care what it takes, just save and do it now. I don't care what it costs, I'll raise the money, like that. And literally almost in the same headspace be, how can you be such an appalling mother to look how much he's suffering just because you haven't got the courage to let him go? You're making him suffer more because you can't stand the other, you know. And I'd have those two in my head simultaneously. So to me, that decision was impossible, which is why I am so grateful that in this country, you don't have to bear the full responsibility of the decision. The American mother in my book, whose child had a range of neurodegenerative conditions, I'll let that sink in for a second. She said that was the worst thing of all. 11 years after this child, you know, and she realized at the end, that, you know, that the cruelest thing they did was to go, what do you want us to do to your son? Because they don't take the decision. And so then, of course, they panicked. Is there anything else? Oh my God. And I'm just like, I still literally feel physically sick thinking that that's what happened to she's now my friend.
I think, you know, I remember speaking with someone from my training program, Fiona Toomey, and her daughter had died by suicide. And we talked about the aftermath, and Fiona, you know, said about how you think when something so catastrophic happens, the cavalry is just going to come in and everyone will be there to support you. And there's crickets, you know, no one's there. I think that's the most shocking thing, is this catastrophe has happened and the world is going on and there's nobody here. And we become so vulnerable that we're almost childlike sometimes, you know, when faced with these decisions. We really need people to guide us, and the medical professionals often can guide us in a fabulous way, and sometimes don't either, because maybe they've never done it before or don't know how to manage this situation. And this is where I think all the confusion and difficulty comes in.
It's interesting. The other, and I didn't find out until afterwards, I was listening to Atul Gawande, you know, who wrote the Being Mortal, and he was describing that study in Massachusetts, I think it was, where basically the people who had the palliative care team, so these are the people who know how to manage the comfort in somebody and to make sure the treatments fit totally with what's important to them. They did the two control groups. They had we're talking stage 4, I think it was lung cancer. So they had the group just with, you know, the oncologist, the neurosurgeon, and then they had the group that had that and the palliative care team who know how to have these conversations and have got bereavement counsellors attached. And what I remember my shock when they said the one that had that palliative care team early, right at the beginning, they lived, you know, they said they had a good quality of life. Most of them didn't do the last chemotherapy because it was going to impact on it too much. They checked in with their hospices earlier. And the kicker was, as Atul Gawande says, they lived 25% longer. So people think that if they engage with the palliative care team earlier and accept that death is a possibility, that they're giving up and they mustn't do that. But actually, it's the opposite. Yeah. And I hear the struggle with friends. In fact, my friend's son, who asked his neurosurgeon, can I have palliative input because I'm really struggling with the fact that I could die tomorrow or in 20 years. Oh, we're not there yet, says the neurosurgeon, because they don't know what palliative care teams do. Yeah.
They think it's end of life.
They think it's end of life. And then if you've not been connected by the pal care team to everything that's, in your area, you're then going to be literally not have any information, not be connected to your hospices, and they're the ones that, as I say, the mothers in the book were like, oh my God, if we'd known it was a home from home, these are people who make our child live. They only have one, the death suite, if you like, that's one bed. They've got like 115 out in the community with children living their entire childhood on palliative care and then transferring to adult. I didn't know any of this. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And it's like getting there early. So also then you can advocate for yourself or for your child better because you know what all the options are. And I did say to the doctor after, one of the doctors, because I speak, I've been lucky enough to be able to be asked to speak and then be able to ask them questions afterwards as I've processed it and it's become a sort of physical reality, as you say. And I said, so why aren't you more honest? Because they think they have to frame hope as survival when they know that that's fundamentally dishonest, but they don't know what else to do. So and he said, oh, we didn't want to upset you more. And I'm like, you can't. I'm already on DEFCON 1. And actually, if you don't give me the information I need, I'm not going to be able to support my child in the manner that he needs.
Yeah.
And that's even more scary, that I'm going to fail him. Do you know what I mean?
Sacha, if you could go back to those months after Dee Dee's diagnosis, and if you can remember how it felt for you, you know, if you were lonely or isolated or vulnerable or scared or whatever that was for you, what would you give yourself? What were your needs? What did you need back then?
Such an interesting question, because you're in such fight or flight, you're not even thinking about your own needs. And that's the problem. I think that's where I say to the nurses, you've got to slow me down and go, look, you're holding all this together. You're worried you're going to let your child down, but actually, if you don't look after yourself, everything will fall apart. So I shouldn't have been driving at times. I got so exhausted, you know, and it took a doctor going, I'm now putting you and your husband on sleeping pills. You're so exhausted. And I'm like, but then I won't wake up, you know, I won't hear him when he needs me. And they're like, no, this is for what I take for jet lag. You will go to sleep. You will wake up because it's a teensy dose. You'll be able to deal with what he needs. And then you'll go back to sleep. That pediatrician saved my life and my husband. Because I honestly, I wasn't in the headspace to even think what I needed because I didn't care. I was just like, do you know what I mean?
Now knowing what you know now,
yeah.
Can you reflect on what you might have needed then?
That's very hard in a funny sort of way. I think it's because it's because death happens in hospitals and people are so frightened because we're generally so well, you know, we have this amazing health service and we're in a first world country. I'll say it of myself, you know, I was terrified of serious disease and disability, especially in children. You know, I would literally look the other way and put my fingers in my ears because it was like, if I don't know about it, it can't happen, you know, and that, but breaking that down and the things that, and frankly, you know, the disability community has been doing such an amazing job with, you know, the paramed, everything that they're on television now, that societal changed so that you're not just put out of sight and out of mind. But for children, it's particularly hard because it's people's biggest fear, isn't it? I mean, you know, if dementia's our biggest health taboo and cancer's the second, well, brain tumours unfortunately can carry both of those. So our son ended up with very severe dementia at the end, but nobody ever would voice that. So, and yet if you don't voice things, there's an American nurse that says, name it to tame it, which I like. If you don't voice it, it's not happening, is it? You know,
that's from the work of Dan Sigal, who's a neuroscientist. And when we can name something, I'm feeling anxious, they say like the percentage drops by 30-40% when we actually name the emotion. So when we can track it in our body, feel the sensation, give it a name, speak the name, then it's like it loses the power. It's the unspoken, you know, it's the unspoken words, the unspoken sensations that really cause trouble. But you avoided my question twice.
I
know you're not
I'm trying to answer because I realize it's complicated because what I needed was people not to run away from me. Yeah. And they're only not going to run. So I'm trying to answer that. They're only not going to run away from me if they understand more what these communities are dealing with. Yeah. And that was the hardest thing, as you say. You need the cavalry. You need people not to, you know. Sometimes people will be brave enough to say, you know, how is it going? You know, how is he? I'm so sorry. And then if I would start to talk, I could see them think, oh my God, I don't want her to start talking because this is too much for me. And you'd see them literally step back Or as once happened, I will never forget, this woman covered her, she had a baby, a sort of toddler on her hip, and she'd asked me, and so I started to say, and she covered her child's ears. I remember thinking, I'm not doing this, I'm not talking hysterically. You asked me how he was, and I said he's not great at the moment because we're having to have more brain surgery, in a voice like that, and she covered her child's ears. So that's what I needed, but I know that it's not a simple fix. Is having got there, I got there in the end.
It's key. This, you know, this is really the missing piece. It's the people who can show up, who can cope with the tears, who can cope with the hysterics, not even cope with it, who can just be there, just a hand on the back. And people, you know, I think essentially what's happening is our nervous system is completely dysregulated, which causes intense distress, or which is intensely distressful. This distress, this dysregulation, what we need is to steal moments of regulation as much as possible. And there's nothing that can regulate us more than someone else's regulated nervous system. You know, someone else who can just be with, be alongside. I see you, I'm so sorry, I hear you. Not trying to fix it, not trying to give advice, not getting more, you know, asking questions, getting more of the story. It's just like someone being really solid, steady, present, and showing up again and again. You know, I think that would be the best possible support, as well as walking the dog, minding the kids, bringing dinner. But the thing is, like you say, so many people don't do that, that rather than put ourselves out there in that vulnerable position of going, here's how it really is for me, we withdraw.
Oh, so, and I remember being, well, I was angry in the early days because people would say, we didn't want to intrude or impose. And I think, no, that's rubbish. You don't want to have to listen to this because it's horrid. So you're saying you didn't do it because it's actually, that's about you, you know. So you can imagine, my other mother friends, I mean, they just got so angry, and then you're horrible to deal with, because I called it grief and rage, and I was like, ah.
Yeah.
If
you saw someone drowning, you wouldn't just walk by and go, I don't want to intrude. And I think, you know, when you get a diagnosis like this, it is like you are psychologically drowning. It's too much. I don't know how to swim this. I don't know how to get myself out of this, you know, and we need those people to give us those metaphorical lifeboats, or just the hand, or to swim alongside us for a while. You know, that's really key.
And you sort of, I remember my mum, one of her best friends, saying, oh, I don't know how Sacha and Toby's my husband, I don't know how Sacha and Toby have coped. I mean, and she's got 3 daughters. My mum's got 3 children. And I just don't know how they've coped. I mean, my girls couldn't, because they just love their little ones too much. And my mum's like, sorry? And the thing is, I know it's because people, and I'm glad they don't know what it's like, because then they'd had to have been in my actual shoes, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. And I remember being rung, so I've jumped again, but by another mother who was in hospital with us, whose son, thank goodness, has survived a horrible bone cancer. And I remember her ringing me many years later and saying, aren't you angry that all our children have survived and Dee Dee hasn't? You know, and I said, I was for a while, but then I realized that if I cut off all of you because and I was angry, you know, then actually I really want to know how your son is. And what's more, I don't want someone else's child to be dead because mine's alive. So I could never begrudge a child their life. But I did have to, I know that sounds really obvious, but I did have to kind of step myself through that. And because I did get to what I would call black tar days, where I was just, you know, you're just lucky your child can even sit a GCS. I was, oh yeah, that sort of toxic anger. And realizing that if I shut off Dee Dee's friends, then they have memories of him that we don't have. But it was so tempting, because it was so painful in the early days, seeing them going on. But I'm so glad I didn't. I'm so glad we didn't,
There's all these paradoxes, and you've really highlighted that today. I'm so angry, and why my child, and why are they okay? But yet I still want them around. And, it's just, there's such conflicting emotions, such paradoxical emotions. We have to grow and mature and learn so quickly to be able to carry, to carry all of this stuff. Can I ask you about your hair? We had a brief chat about it, and for anyone who's listening rather than watching, Sacha has this gorgeous blue streak right down the side, and you briefly mentioned it's an outward display.
I did. About a year after Dee Dee had died, I was definitely, that first year, I think I couldn't compute. And that second year was almost worse, because everyone thinks that you're going to be better, I don't think you're ever better, are you? It just gets easier. Anyway, I go to the hairdresser because I kind of wanted to just rip all my hair out. I wanted to do something drastic. But then I kind of panicked in the hairdresser's chair. I thought, I need to do something that sort of shows the damage on the inside, so people have a slight warning. It's like the warning on the tin that things aren't quite what they seem with this person. and it was a bit of fun, I guess. It was a fun way of sort of, I've always liked clothes and fashion and that kind of thing, of doing something that wasn't too drastic, even though I was feeling drastic. But apparently, I remember talking to Julia Samuel, who wrote the I can't remember the name of her book now, Grief Works, and she talked about that at one point they were going to relaunch a sort of campaign where you'd wear a black band on your arm, so people would understand that you are the walking wounded, basically. So people realize just this person, I love the way you said earlier on that you feel like a skinned animal, because I remember articulating it as, I feel like one of those bulbs, the old-fashioned 60-watt bulbs, where that glass is really, 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 really thin. And on a really bad day, I think if someone actually breathed on it, I would just atomize to dust. There's just nothing holding that glass together, So, when you're feeling like that, for people to kind of know, and even though I'm not like that, I'm very used to how my grief feels. It lives with me. Dee Dee lives on my shoulder, as it were. This is still a sort of sign, and I'm not ready to let it go. And because my hair's going so grey, I feel like I used to have bright orange hair. It's now basically grey. So it's like, damn it, I'm still going to have some colour in my hair.
Yeah. It's really interesting. The thin glass bulb. I love that, and it's a way of really understanding the visceral effect of trauma. Essentially, like it's traumatic. It's pure trauma when we're told that our child might not survive. It's the very basic animal instinct is to protect our children, but the amount of people who've described it, I've a truckload of grief was dumped on me, the weight of grief. Or Linda Allen, I've said a few times, described it like my nervous system was on the outside. When I see people, post a trauma, if they come to me, it's like a rabbit caught in headlights that's also had its skin removed. That trauma in the body, that terror, And what do we do when somebody is so vulnerable? It is so important to just meet it with compassion, with presence, just to sit alongside. And it's to use our bodies. Like, how can we use our bodies when they're regulated to soothe someone else? So for anyone listening, what are things that we can do to regulate and soothe ourselves? And it is things like the cliche stuff, actually, walking in nature, feeling the solidity of the earth under your feet, feeling something that's bigger than you under your feet. I know for me, actually, it sounds nuts, but throwing my arms around a tree. I took my daughter out for a walk the other day. She was having a wobbly time, and we went up to the forest. I was like, grab that tree now, really lean your weight into it and feel something else holding us, finding scaffoldings, when we're like that jellyfish, finding a scaffolding to hold us up. But it's
Funny,
very
isn't it?
physical, minding the body.
You're absolutely right, because there's nothing that you can say to make someone feel better or that's going to fix it. But I needed hugs, because nothing can be said. It's that physical pressure of a warm body. So I have become, as I say to people, I'm afraid I've become rather over huggy, and you're just going to have to put up with it, because I'm going to give you a really big squeeze. I mean, I now can laugh about it, but it's not funny. I really needed that.
Yeah.
And I know I've got a friend who's a geriatrician, a doctor, and she said if anyone had told her at the beginning of her career that putting her hand on a patient's arm, hand, leg, anything, and saying, I'm going to make you feel better in a soothing voice worked, she'd have just laughed in their face. But it's physical connection. You're absolutely right. A lot of hugs, but I know that we frighten people, especially bereaved parents. And I get that totally, but it's like, you've just got to say, I'm so sorry. And, how's your day going? Because obviously, every day was like a minefield, frankly, to start off with. So don't say nothing. We need our children acknowledged. And if I start talking about my child, please join in with any memories you've got, because that really, I'm trying to get to the place where I can enjoy those memories. They're not just causing me acute pain. And I have got there, but I see it's the fear in people. They're going to say the wrong thing. And I think for families also who spend most of their time in hospital, and you then become totally attached to the medical team, and then you come out and your child's died and nobody in the community or your friends saw it, they didn't know what happened. That is so difficult, And then for older children, I think for neonates, you can go back in and ask to speak to your consultant about what happened. Talk to me about this genetic condition. But if you're beyond neonate, that's it. You never see them again. And these are people, it's like men in the trenches. These are people who adored your child and they were there with you. And it's really hard to lose those. Well, I found it incredibly hard to lose those healthcare professionals. And that's one of the reasons that I enjoy going out, even if I don't meet those ones, but actually I still do go and speak at Southampton because I want to see the nurses.
Nice.
But that's really hard. I mean, I think actually they should include going back to see the team as part of the bereavement for parents who lose children beyond the neonatal stage, to help them. I think that would be really helpful in my humble opinion.
They've been present at the most important times of your life, and you'll never ever forget them. I have an image just when we were talking there, about that anticipatory grief stage and how grief really impacts the body in such a profound way. And if we go to the dentist and we've a tooth removed, we don't try and go about our normal business. We come home, we make something really nourishing for ourselves, something that we can, swallow gently. We put something warm on it. Maybe we put on some music, we wrap ourselves up, we mind ourselves. We must do the same with psychic pain. And even better if there's somebody who's willing to do that for us or with us. It's just right. Care, compassion, kindness, till our bodies can feel safe again. Because when we can get to that safety in our bodies, that, today is okay, we can actually start to enjoy our child's life while they're still living.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I think, I expected that I'd be this sort of, weeping all the time person, in all those years of chaos and crisis and his, but we did manage pockets of total magic. We really did. But I think when I felt most dissonance was when we'd gone out, my husband and I, when Dee Dee was stable and everything was okay, and he was old enough with his brother to babysit our younger daughter, and we'd gone out for the night, and we'd be like chatting and laughing and drinking too much, and then you're not behaving as people expect someone who has got a child who's incredibly ill. And that's almost when you'd feel the dissonance worse, that somehow you couldn't enjoy yourself because you've got to go around looking traumatized the whole time, when it's like, it doesn't work like that, you know.
No, and it's essential. And we know from the research that the best way to process these kind of events is to face them, to feel it, to surrender to it, and then go to the movies or make dinner or go and have a laugh at a bad joke, you know? And it's the dipping in and out and in and out that actually helps us integrate this new reality. It's called the dual process model.
Oh, is it? As I say, because it is, and I think, you know, you're being so helpful to people who are supporting people like me, because as you say, it's like, just follow. So if I'm laughing hysterically and asking for another drink, you just go with it. Just say, hey, have another one, and just, you know, go with me. Don't, please, I know it's slightly terrifying, but, you know, just be with me. Don't, because if you give me the thing that you're judging how I'm being, oh my goodness, you know, I can remember sort of going out to dinner when the sort of sweat running down my body as someone was basically making a judgment, and the sort of, and then I didn't know whether we should just leave the party because I can't deal with this. Then I wanted to scream at her, and then I thought I can't because I'm upset the host, and all of this is going on in your head. But you sort of know in your brain you've got to try and keep connected to people, because if I disconnect, I know it's going to be worse.
Yeah.
But my goodness, it's
I think that's one of the biggest challenges, Sacha, and I've often said it to bereaved parents that I support. One of your biggest challenges is going to be trusting your own integrity and allowing yourself just to be, however that is. If it's in denial, so be it. We have our defenses for a reason. If it's deeply grieving, so be it. If it's roaring, laughing, drunk at a party, that happens too. You know, Hollywood has done such a disservice to bereaved people to go, here's what it looks like all the time. It isn't, you know, and it is okay to be happy. It does not make you a bad person. Your child can die and you can have moments of happiness, even moments of joy. They can coexist. And you're not a bad person for just allowing yourself to live your life. You know, that's really, really important.
It's so hard, isn't it? And I think I then discovered, because again, it's people like, you know, how can you even have this conversation with you? How can you? They can't imagine. And I'm glad they can't imagine. I don't want them to be able to imagine it. But you do have that whole, you know, how do you cope? You get that all the way through and beyond. And I then discovered that cope comes from some Middle French word for to come to blows. And I thought, that is how I feel about the word cope. I frankly often wanted to just punch somebody. Like, I'm going to come to blows now because this is just boom, you know. And you think, but then I would have lost a lot of friends. But it is great that that's what's implied in that word. It somehow sounds like cope is a sort of soft word. It's not. It's a very knotty, hard word. Yeah. For some reason, that sort of helped. I thought, yeah, I could have just punched you. I mean, I didn't, but
well done for restraining yourself. But you know, but it's why a lot of people, or you know, will turn to running or swimming or something that will use up that surplus of energy or stress hormones. You know, it has to go somewhere. And if we're not running it out of us, or expressing it with words, or putting it down in art, or writing it in poetry, you know, it's going to go somewhere, or we're going to be frozen in the discomfort of it constantly. So, you know, I do say over and again, grief, whether it's anticipatory or a bereavement, it needs expression, and find a way somehow to express it, whether it's pillows, whatever, you know, we're punching a punch bag, but finding some way to express it.
It's so weird, isn't it? Because I suppose my moment of anticipatory grief that was most sort of, you know, was it was the party that we organised once we got back from hospital, and we managed to get all his friends to come, and it was beautiful weather and everyone had made cakes. So the cavalry did arrive. You know, I called it because I'd got to the point where I'd done this for 4.5 years. I had no shame about saying, you, I need this, you, I need that. But that took me a long time.
Well,
So
you have to call in the cavalry, isn't it?
So I
They're not
called in
gonna
the
just
cavalry,
come.
and they were bringing cakes and candles and I'm sitting, as it's all about to kick off, by the washing machine, having lost it over the washing. Of course, it's always the littlest thing, isn't it? I've lost it by the washing machine, and I'm crying. And one of my oldest friends is there, just being there, being brilliant. And I'm like, I can't do this. I can't. This is his last party. It's his last. And then I'm suddenly like, oh, right. So great. So now you're sitting here going, you're ruining the time you've got by weeping over the fact that it's his last party. And actually, if you start worrying, if you're worrying about how it's going to be, you're going to wreck the time we've got left, which is way too precious. So I managed to kind of, and my friend was there, and I got there. But again, if someone had said this is a thing called anticipatory grief, yeah, try not to think forwards about how you're going to manage, because you can't think about that now.
Yeah,
that would have been really helpful.
Yeah. It's the ultimate lesson in mindfulness and staying in the present moment, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And so much easier said than done. Sacha, your book is called Follow the Child. I've bought it for a local family that I know who hopefully will find it helpful. Who's it for?
There's 20 children it's dedicated to, and who've died, and not all of cancer, from different diseases. And I read all their names out at the House of Commons, because I basically got together with 6 other, the biggest charities, including Marie Curie, everyone, and read out all their names, because the Brain Tumor Charity had done some research a few years before the book came out in 2018, saying that parents at end of life felt totally isolated. They had no information, didn't know what to do. And I thought, yeah, that's right. I had no idea when I heard, when you heard in hospital that families went home, you knew that that child was going to die and they weren't going to be coming back. But no one said what that meant in practical terms. You know, how is that organized? What support is there? So I thought, yeah, I was first asked to speak to families, and I thought, oh, I don't think I can. Will they even listen? I mean, because I know I didn't want to listen. But actually, families did listen at this event, and so did all the healthcare professionals. And then one of the families contacted me afterwards and said, my 17-year-old had a beautiful death because you empowered my wife. And I thought, oh my goodness, that will be the most important thing I've ever done in my entire life, along with, you know, supporting Didi through his life and his death. And then because I think I made the comparison between, you know, you wouldn't give birth without a birth plan. Why would you think you would go through a death without a death plan? And that got picked up by the press. And then because of that, I was asked by Jess Kingsley to write the book. And then I thought, I can't just speak from the cancer community, because the cancer community gets a lot more press than a lot of the rarer children's diseases. And, you know, when we sat in the children's brain unit in Southampton, I would be listening to parents with all sorts of other horrendous diseases they were trying to manage, and with a lot less sort of charity support than I was getting. So I thought, right, I'm going to involve, through Together for Short Lives, the children's palliative charity, I'm going to involve other families. And that's how it happens. So it's 5 families with children with different things, and sort of the conversations we had, how we tried to make decisions, the practical support. And there's a list of support at the back. And there's also a planning document for healthcare professionals at the back, done by a nurse who has massive experience in this area and has run a children's hospice, and marvelous woman. It's her life's experience, really. And then it was basically checked, because we were so paranoid that we would misinform, that we had it checked by healthcare professionals of every stripe. And because one of the parents is in America, it was an American pediatric consultant and a British one, an American nurse, a British one, you know, a funeral director. We did our best. So even if it's rubbish, it's something, and it's very broken down. So if you're in the kind of state that we are, if there's just one little bit and there's a good index, so there's just one thing that's bugging you, you just can dip in and out, or you can just hurl it across the room in fury.
Well, like anything, you take what feels useful to you. You know, same from our conversation. I'm so aware that these are such difficult themes. especially for somebody who's going through a recent diagnosis. But take what's useful today. And maybe in 4 months you go, I might listen back to that. There might be something else that's relevant. It's certainly all offered with the best of intentions on both of our parts. But, you know, such difficult conversations. And when we are in that hypervigilant state, it's easy to be hurt or to feel, you know, it's easy to do harm, even with good intentions. The impact can be harmful. So,
but you could, the other thing is, I know lots of people where the best friend has got it. So then if the family's asking, the best friend goes, oh, I think we can do that. Or would you like me to sort that out? So it's sort of, you know, it's one remove. But then, you know, the person who connected us, she read it for her gorgeous girl, Ruby, and has been a huge supporter of it, which is always a relief, because as you say, you know the harm that can be done.
Yeah. And I'm referring more to our chat and the podcast than the book, you know. It's just, I'm so aware that this, you know, with our best intentions to be informative and supportive, it doesn't mean that the impact of this conversation is going to be informative and supportive. And, you know, so yeah, for anybody listening, probably should have said this at the beginning, not at the end, you know, take what's helpful, disregard the rest. Everybody's journey is so unique, and hopefully that there's something here that will really support listeners today. But Sacha, I'm so grateful to you for the work you're doing out there in the world. It is this force, isn't it, that bereaved people who've experienced a really difficult bereavement, they just want to reach out a hand to people coming behind and make it a little bit easier. And it's incredibly selfless. So thank you for doing that.
You're so welcome. And you know, you can do it. I didn't think I could do it. You can do it, honestly.
Great. It's an important message to say to people, you can do this. Yes, it's brutal. Yes, it can be atrocious. Yes, it's possibly the worst thing that'll ever happen. And bit by bit, you'll find your feet again, stand a little bit straighter. You grow to be able to carry this in time with the right supports. But it's an active process. You know, it's active engaging with your grief and what's going on. Sacha, thank you so much.
So welcome. Amazing what you're doing. I'm definitely going to post your courses, because it's just fantastic. We need your support. We need the people that you're training so much. I know far too many people was not offered any bereavement support till this year, the 10th year.
Wow. Yeah. And, you know, there's counselors and psychotherapists and psychologists and social workers out there who are at hand in a lot of places, who haven't ever trained in loss and grief, who don't know what grief is, an umbrella term for such a myriad of possible emotions. So yeah, the Shapes of Grief training hopefully is going some way in addressing that. And I've just written an article on ambiguous loss for Marie Curie. So people are starting to realize that the resource is out there and that it's a valuable resource. So it's great, yes. So please spread the word, and anyone listening, please spread the word. It's on shapesofgrief.com. Sacha, thank you, and have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye.